let's establish our history. 7th century, Muslims began invading countries and taking over all the way really into France until
50% of all the Christians in the world at the time of the 7th century were wiped out in the next 3 centuries. In the first,
by whom?
By the Muslim jihadists.
All right.
In the first 3 centuries of Islam, we're talking about from 632 AD, the death of Muhammad, all the way through, for the first 3 centuries of Islam, they wiped out 50% of all the Christians on the planet. Now, you may not think this is too impressive yet, but let me point out that the church's heartland at that time was the Middle East and North Africa. Europe was the backwater, and of course America hadn't been discovered yet. Now, the Muslims wiped out 3,200 churches. We're talking about 3,200 church buildings wiped out in North Africa in the first 3 centuries alone. Remember, all the greatest names of early church history were North Africans. Origen,
right.
Augustine, Tertullian,
all right,
Ignatius,
only because we got to do this in lickety-split time. So up until about the 11th century, finally about 1092, 1093, Pope Urban II.
5 centuries of Islamic jihad. They've just about almost took France if it wasn't for the Battle of Tours, and they're destroying the Byzantine Empire, the Christian Empire. They've destroyed 10,000 church buildings just in the century before the Crusades begin. Now, Bill Clinton says in his speeches, the tensions and the violence in the Middle East began with the Crusades. I can't believe the man's that ignorant. They start 5 centuries before the Crusades began,
and
actually.
so clearly, they were done in response
a reaction.
To, now, while some things we have to confess went wrong with the Catholic, not the Christian, the Catholic Crusades, the motive, was it to get rich, was it for land?
There's no way it could have been for land or to get rich. In fact, most of the Crusaders got bankrupt. They had to sell their lands to take part in the Crusades.
To raise the funds to be able to travel there.
4 years minimum, and only 10% of the Crusaders were horse soldiers. Most were infantry, 90% were foot soldiers. We're talking about 9,000 miles round-trip logistics. Now, if you're going for loot, you can't carry enough loot when you're crossing deserts. You need to carry water. I mean, just basic geography and history should teach people about the fact that the guys who got involved in the Crusades did it sacrificially. You may not agree with them, but the fact is it was a sacrificial act of trying to help their brethren. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't colonialism. They were just trying to win back lands that had been invaded
away
by Muslim invaders. So you cannot understand the Crusades unless you understand the jihad that started beforehand and which has continued since.
All right, now, but however, just so that we are fair, there were some things that happened on the Catholic Crusades that were bad, that we would say that was shameful.
In every single war. I mean, shall we mention what was done during the American Crusade to free Europe in the Second World War? I mean, cities were bombed, how many millions of civilians killed? There's a lot of terrible things that happened in the Second World War. Was it wrong to fight against Nazism,
the war,
for example?
Right.
Now, the fact that some of the soldiers committed atrocities, unquestionable, outrageous, disgraceful, and no one wants to justify that. But let's look at the big picture. Were the Crusades a failure or not? Professor Madden and Professor Jonathan Riley Smith, two of the greatest authorities in the world on the Crusades, today say the Crusades were not a failure. They bought Europe time. Without the Crusades taking the initiative, uniting Europe for the first time against the common enemy, and taking the battle to the enemy, Europe would have fallen to Islam. No Europe, only Arabia.